It was a warm afternoon, the kind where the sun hung in the sky like a golden ball, and the streets were quieter than usual. Officer Daniels was on his regular patrol, keeping an eye on the town he had known his entire career. Nothing too exciting ever happened here. The people went about their day-to-day routines, the roads stayed clear, and the crimes were few. But today something caught his attention. He was driving down Main Street when he spotted a man sitting alone in a car, parked across from the local bank. It wasn't unusual for people to park there, but something about this particular man caught Daniel's eye. He was relaxed, sitting back in the driver's seat, one hand resting on the steering wheel while the other held a phone to his ear. His attention was split between the phone call and some papers on the passenger seat. Daniel squinted. He had seen people parked there plenty of times before, but the man's calm demeanor made him pause. Something didn't feel right. Maybe it was the time of day. Maybe the man's relaxed posture. Daniels wasn't sure, but his instincts told him something was off. The officer continued driving slowly, glancing back at the parked car in his rearview mirror. His mind was working fast. Maybe the man was up to something, maybe not, but it wasn't worth taking chances. After all, this was his job. It was his duty to look out for anything suspicious, and right now, the man looked suspicious. Daniels pulled over to the side of the road, parking his patrol car a little further down the block. He sat there for a few moments watching the man. He didn't seem to notice Daniels observing him. His phone call continued as if everything were perfectly normal. But Daniels couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Taking a deep breath, he opened the door and got out of the car. He walked slowly toward the parked vehicle, his eyes fixed on the man. As he got closer, he could see that the man hadn't noticed him yet. He was still talking on the phone, scribbling something down on the papers in front of him. The quiet hum of the town was all around him, but Daniels was focused on the man. He had to figure out what was going on. When Daniels was close enough, he cleared his throat. The man looked up and their eyes met. "Hey there," Daniel said, his voice firm but not unkind. "What are you doing parked here?" The man's face showed no sign of alarm, only curiosity. He looked up at Daniels calmly and said, "Just waiting for a friend." "Nothing unusual." His voice was steady and his eyes were calm. Daniels wasn't convinced. There was something about the situation that didn't sit right with him. He had seen people parked in the same spot countless times, but the man's relaxed nature made him uneasy. "I need to see your ID," Daniel said, his voice more forceful now. He hadn't meant to sound so abrupt, but the situation was starting to feel tense. The man didn't seem surprised or upset. He simply nodded and reached into his pocket. "Sure, officer," he said, taking out his wallet and pulling out his ID. He handed it to Daniels without hesitation. Daniels glanced at the ID for a moment, barely processing the details. He wasn't interested in the man's name. He was still focused on his gut feeling. "Step out of the car, please," he ordered, trying to keep his voice steady. The man hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Okay," he said softly, opening the car door. As he stepped out of the car, Daniels noticed that he wasn't nervous at all. In fact, he seemed completely calm, like this kind of thing happened every day. Daniels motioned for the man to move to the sidewalk. He didn't want to make a scene, but he needed to see what was going on. "Please step over here," he said, his tone still firm but controlled. The man complied, walking toward the sidewalk without resistance. Once they were both standing on the sidewalk, Daniels took a step back, keeping an eye on the man. "What's your name?" he asked, hoping to get more information. "David," the man replied without missing a beat. He didn't seem flustered, and his response was simple, but Daniels was still on edge. There was no reason for the man to be so calm. "Why are you parked here?" Daniels pressed, still searching for something that would give him a reason to act. "Just waiting for my colleague," David said again, his tone polite but not anxious. He seemed almost too calm, too easygoing for someone in this situation. Daniels didn't know what to make of it. He glanced over at the bank across the street, then back at David. "You've been here for a while. I just need to make sure everything's okay." David didn't argue. He just nodded, his expression neutral. "It's fine," he said again. "I'm not doing anything wrong." Daniels wasn't convinced. He couldn't explain it, but everything about the situation felt wrong. His suspicions were growing, and despite the man's calm demeanor, Daniel's gut told him to keep digging. The moment felt like it stretched on forever. but Daniels had already made up his mind. "I'm going to need to search your car," he said, more as a statement than a question. David looked up at him, his face still calm, but his eyes held a flicker of something. Was it annoyance? "I really don't think that's necessary," David said, his voice low but steady. He didn't seem scared, just matter-of-fact. Daniels ignored the comment, stepping closer to the car. He didn't think twice. He was doing his job, and his instincts told him something wasn't right. David didn't protest further, but Daniels could tell the man wasn't thrilled. Just as Daniels reached for the door handle, David's phone rang. He glanced at it before looking up at the officer. "I need to take this call," he said, his voice calm. Daniels hesitated but then nodded. David stepped a little to the side, still speaking into the phone in a low voice. Daniels stood there, waiting. He tried not to stare at David, but his mind was racing. He wasn't sure why, but he felt a sense of urgency. The call lasted only a few minutes, but it felt like an eternity to Daniels. When David hung up, he turned back to the officer, his expression unchanged. "Sorry about that," he said simply. "I'm really just here for a meeting. Nothing else." Daniels nodded slowly, though he wasn't sure he believed it. There was still something about David that felt off. The man hadn't shown any sign of nervousness, but Daniels couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. "I'm going to have to arrest you," Daniels said abruptly. His words came out harsher than he intended. David's calm demeanor didn't help. If anything, it made Daniels feel more uncomfortable. David looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "You're making a mistake, officer." Daniels didn't respond. He was already reaching for his handcuffs. He snapped them onto David's wrists, and the man didn't resist. He simply stood there, his face still calm. Once the cuffs were on, Daniels turned toward the patrol car. "Get in," he said. David didn't fight him. He didn't argue or try to make things difficult. He just walked over to the car and climbed into the back seat. As Daniels drove away, he couldn't help but wonder what he had just done. The whole thing felt wrong. He wasn't sure if he had just arrested an innocent man, or if he had stumbled onto something bigger. But for now, all he could do was drive, wondering where this would lead. As the patrol car drove away from the quiet street, Daniels couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He glanced over at the man sitting quietly in the back seat, his hands cuffed in front of him. The man didn't seem upset or panicked. In fact, he didn't seem to care at all. His calmness only made Daniels feel more uneasy. The silence between them was heavy. Daniels could hear the hum of the engine and the soft tapping of his own fingers on the steering wheel. But other than that, there was nothing. The man in the back seat hadn't said a word since Daniels had placed him in the car. He just sat there looking out the window as if nothing was happening. Daniels wanted to ask more questions to try to figure out what was going on. But for some reason, he couldn't bring himself to speak. Maybe it was because he wasn't sure what to ask. Or maybe it was because he knew that no matter how much he questioned this man, he wouldn't get the answers he wanted. Daniel's mind kept racing, trying to make sense of the situation. There had to be a reason for everything, but nothing about this man made sense to him. He glanced in the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the man's calm expression. It was almost as if he wasn't even bothered by being arrested. He wasn't angry, wasn't worried, wasn't frightened. Daniels had dealt with countless suspects in his time, and every one of them had been afraid in some way. But this man? He was different, and it unsettled Daniels in a way he couldn't explain. The streets passed by in a blur as Daniels drove toward the police station. His thoughts kept wandering back to that moment when he first approached the man's car. Was it his gut that told him to be suspicious, or was it his own assumptions clouding his judgment? Daniels had been doing this job for a long time, and he had learned to trust his instincts. But today, his instincts seemed to be leading him down a path he wasn't sure he wanted to follow. He couldn't help but replay the moment in his mind, step by step. He had seen the man sitting in the car, just a regular person. He hadn't done anything out of the ordinary. But there was something about the way the man was sitting. Something too calm, too collected. Daniels had seen enough to know that when people acted that way, it was usually a sign that they were hiding something. But what? As the car neared the station, Daniels started to feel the weight of his decision. He had arrested this man without cause, without knowing who he really was. He had acted on a hunch, on a feeling in his gut. And now, as he approached the station, he couldn't help but wonder if he had made a mistake. When they arrived at the station, Daniels parked the patrol car in the designated spot and turned off the engine. He opened the door and got out, then walked around to the back of the car to pull the man out. He was still calm, still not resisting, still not showing any signs of fear or anger. Daniels opened the door and ordered him to step out of the car. The man complied without hesitation. "Let's go inside," Daniels said, his voice low. He didn't want to make a scene, but he knew the situation was only going to get more complicated from here. He led the man toward the entrance of the station, keeping a firm grip on his arm as they walked. The man didn't say anything, didn't ask why he was being arrested, didn't even try to look around to see if anyone was watching. He just walked alongside Daniels, his face still unreadable. When they reached the desk, Daniels told the officer on duty to process the arrest. The officer, a young man named Officer Hayes, looked up at him in surprise. "You arrested him for loitering?" Hayes asked, clearly confused. "You know the law on that, right? There has to be some kind of reason. You can't just arrest someone because you feel like it." Daniels hesitated for a moment. He wasn't sure what to say. He had arrested the man based on his gut feeling. But now that he was here, standing in front of his fellow officers, he realized he didn't have much of an explanation. He could feel the weight of their eyes on him, the pressure building. "I know," Daniels finally said. I had a bad feeling about him. Something didn't seem right." He knew it wasn't a great excuse, but it was the truth, and it was all he had. Hayes didn't say anything at first. He just looked at Daniels, then at the man, and back at Daniels again. "Okay, well, let's get him booked. But you better have a good reason for this." As the officer began to take the man's details, Daniels stepped back, leaning against the counter. He watched the process, his mind still racing. What had he done? He had arrested someone based on a feeling, without any real evidence of wrongdoing. It was a dangerous thing to do, and he knew it. Meanwhile, the man didn't react. He didn't fight, didn't argue, didn't try to escape. He just stood there, silently submitting to the process. His calmness only made Daniels feel more uneasy. Who was this man? What was he hiding? Why wasn't he scared? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the paperwork was done. The officer handed Daniels a file with the man's name and basic details. "It's all set," Hayes said, his tone a little more skeptical than before. Daniels took the file and walked over to the interrogation room. He led the man inside and closed the door behind them. The room was small, with a simple table and 2 chairs. The man sat down without being told, folding his hands on the table in front of him. Daniels stood across from him, trying to figure out what to do next. The silence between them was thick, like the calm before a storm. He felt like he needed to say something, but he wasn't sure where to begin. "So," Daniels said, finally breaking the silence, "what's your story? What were you really doing outside that bank?" The man looked up at him, his eyes meeting Daniels with an unwavering calmness. "I told you already," he said simply. "I was just waiting for a colleague." "I don't know why this is a big deal." Daniels shook his head. "You're not telling me everything. What's going on? Who are you, really?" The man's expression remained unchanged. "I'm not anyone special," he said, his voice steady. "Just a regular guy. You're making this harder than it needs to be." Daniels felt a surge of frustration. This wasn't going the way he had imagined. The man wasn't giving him anything to work with, and that made him feel even more confused. What was he supposed to do now? He couldn't just let this go. He had to figure out who this man was and why he had been acting so strangely. He leaned forward, trying to get a better read on the man. "You've got to give me something," Daniels said, his voice low. "Tell me what's going on. Why were you acting so calm earlier? Why didn't you resist?" The man finally looked up at him, his gaze sharp. "Because I knew you'd make a mistake," he said quietly. "And when you did, I knew I'd be able to fix it. I'm not here to make things difficult. I'm just trying to do my job." Daniels paused, a chill running down his spine. Something in the man's words hit him hard. He wasn't just some random guy. This was someone who had been watching Daniels closely, someone who had been prepared for this moment. "I don't know what you're talking about," Daniels said, his voice barely a whisper. "But I'll find out." The man's lips curled into a faint smile, but there was no humor in it. "You'll figure it out soon enough," he said. And just like that, the conversation went silent again. Daniels felt his heart race. The more he tried to get answers, the more questions the man seemed to create. This was no ordinary arrest. Something much bigger was happening, and Daniels had no idea just how deep it went. Daniels sat across from the man in the small interrogation room, his mind spinning. He couldn't make sense of the situation. Everything about it felt wrong, and yet he couldn't figure out why. The man sitting across from him remained calm, his demeanor unshaken. It was as though this whole situation was nothing more than a minor inconvenience to him. The silence between them stretched on, thick with unspoken questions. Daniel shifted in his seat, glancing at the file in front of him. It was a standard arrest report, but something felt off. There was no criminal record, no history, nothing that indicated this man was anything other than what he claimed to be, just a regular guy. And yet Daniels couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. He leaned forward, trying to break the silence. "Who are you really?" he asked, his voice low. "What's going on? You're not just some guy waiting for a colleague, are you?" The man didn't respond right away. Instead, he looked at Daniels with those steady eyes, as if weighing whether or not he should speak. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm and even. "I told you before. I'm not anyone special. Just a guy with a job trying to do what I'm supposed to do." Daniels felt a wave of frustration. He knew the man was hiding something, but what? His instincts told him there was more to this, but every time he tried to dig deeper, the man deflected. It was maddening. "You're not telling me the truth," Daniels pressed. "There's something you're not saying. Why aren't you scared? Most people in your position would be freaking out, but not you. What's going on?" The man didn't flinch. He didn't even seem to take offense. Instead, he sat back in his chair, his hands still resting calmly on the table. "I'm not afraid of you, officer. You're just doing your job, just like I'm doing mine. I don't need to be scared." The words stung, but Daniels couldn't deny that there was some truth to them. The man wasn't afraid, and that was what unsettled him the most. There was a calmness, a confidence that didn't match the situation. Daniels tried another approach, hoping to break through the wall the man had built around himself. "Who are you working for?" he asked, leaning forward. "What's your real purpose here? Why did you act so calm when I arrested you? Are you involved in something bigger than just waiting for a colleague?" The man remained silent for a moment before responding. "I'm just doing my job," he said again, his voice unwavering. "Nothing more, nothing less. I don't have any hidden agenda. I'm not some criminal mastermind. I'm just a man with a job." Daniels could feel his patience wearing thin. He stood up abruptly, walking around the table. His mind raced with questions, but the man's answers only made him more confused. Something wasn't adding up, and the more Daniels pushed, the less he seemed to understand. He stopped in front of the one-way mirror and stared at his reflection. He could feel the eyes of his colleagues on him, but he didn't care. He had to figure this out. He had to know who this man was, why he was acting the way he was. He couldn't just let it go. After a long pause, Daniels finally turned back to the man. "You're not just some regular guy," he said, his voice firm. "I know you're lying. I need to know what you're really involved in." The man's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "You think I'm lying?" he asked, his tone almost amused. "I'm not lying to you, officer. But if you want to know what's really going on, maybe you should stop asking the wrong questions." Daniels was taken aback by the response. The man was right. He had been focusing on the wrong things. He had been trying to force answers out of him, instead of understanding what was really going on. The man wasn't acting like a criminal, but he wasn't acting like an innocent person either. Taking a step back, Daniels decided to change his approach. "Okay," he said, his voice quieter now. "What should I be asking? What do I need to know?" The man looked at him for a long time, as if considering whether or not he should answer. Finally, he spoke. "You should be asking who I really am and why I'm here. Not because I'm a threat, but because I'm part of something bigger than both of us." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. There it was. The answer he had been looking for, or at least a clue. "What do you mean by something bigger?" he asked, leaning forward again, his curiosity piqued. The man took a deep breath, as if preparing himself to speak. "I'm not who you think I am. I'm not just some random person. I'm part of an organization, a group that works behind the scenes. You might not understand it and you might not believe me, but it's true. We don't operate the way you think. We do what needs to be done, whether the world likes it or not." Daniels felt a chill run down his spine. This was it, the moment that everything changed. The man wasn't just someone waiting for a colleague. He wasn't just some guy who got caught up in a misunderstanding. He was part of something much bigger, something Daniels didn't fully understand, but he knew one thing for sure: this was no ordinary arrest. He took a deep breath, trying to process what the man had just said. "So you're telling me you're part of some organization? A group that operates in secret?" The man nodded slowly. "Yes, we're not a criminal organization, not in the way you think. We're more like protectors in a way. We do the things that have to be done, the things that others can't or won't do, and we work outside the law, outside the system. We do what's necessary, even if it's not popular." Daniels could hardly believe what he was hearing. The man's words didn't make sense, but there was something in his eyes that made Daniels feel like he was telling the truth. There was no fear, no hesitation, just an unwavering calmness. This wasn't some wild story. This was a man who believed in what he was saying. "So what does that have to do with me?" Daniels asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The man met his gaze, his expression serious. "You're involved now," he said simply. "Whether you want to be or not. You've already made a choice by arresting me, and now you're going to have to make another choice, whether you want to be part of this or whether you want to walk away." Daniels didn't know what to say. His mind was spinning, his thoughts racing. This wasn't just about an arrest anymore. This was bigger than anything he had ever dealt with. He had just stumbled into something he couldn't fully understand. The man stood up from the table, his cuffs still on. He walked to the door, pausing before he left. "Think about what I said," he said, his voice low. "The choice is yours. But know this: you'll never be the same after today." And with that, he was gone. Daniel stood there, staring at the door for what felt like an eternity. His mind was a blur of thoughts, questions, and confusion. He had just arrested a man who claimed to be part of something much bigger, something secret, something unknown. He didn't know what to believe anymore. But one thing was clear: this wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The room felt heavier after the man left. Daniel stood there for a long time, processing everything that had just happened. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had just crossed a line, stepped into something much larger than his small world of routine arrests. His mind kept replaying the man's words. "You're involved now, whether you want to be or not." What had he gotten himself into? Daniels paced the room, running his fingers through his hair. It had been just another night shift, just another arrest until now. Nothing made sense. He had been trained to spot lies, to read people, to discern truth from deception. But this man, this stranger, had defied everything Daniels thought he knew. There was no fear, no anger, no resistance, just calm acceptance, like he had been waiting for this moment. Daniels had heard people say that someone could seem so calm because they were in control or because they knew something others didn't. But Daniels wasn't sure who was in control anymore. Daniels stopped pacing and glanced at the door. He was alone now. He hadn't even noticed when the others had left the room, leaving him to his thoughts. A soft knock on the door broke his trance. He quickly walked over and opened it. Officer Hayes was standing there, looking concerned. "You good, Daniels? You've been in here for a while." Daniels nodded, trying to shake off the unease. "Yeah, just thinking." Hayes stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the empty chair. "So what's the deal with the guy? You going to process him or what?" Daniels hesitated. He had been so focused on the man's words that he hadn't even considered the next step. It should have been routine. He should have processed him and moved on. But nothing about this arrest felt routine. "I don't know," Daniels said, his voice heavy. "I don't know who he is, Hayes. He keeps saying he's part of something bigger, something I don't understand." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean? Is he playing games with you or what?" Daniels ran a hand over his face, the frustration building again. "It's not like that. He's not lying, at least I don't think he is. He says he's part of some secret group, working outside the law, but he's so calm about it, like he's trying to get me to believe him." Hayes leaned against the desk, looking thoughtful. "You know, I've heard rumors about things like this. People talking about groups operating under the radar, doing things the government can't. But it's all just rumors, right? No real proof. Maybe the guy's just messing with you." Daniels shook his head. "I don't know. This isn't like anything I've ever seen. He's different, Hayes. I've arrested people for years and I've never had anyone like him." There was a long pause and then Hayes shrugged. "Well, you've got to do your job. Process him, get his statement, and let the higher-ups decide what's next. But don't let this guy get in your head, Daniels. People like him try to get under your skin." Daniels nodded slowly, but the doubt lingered. He didn't feel like he was being played, and that scared him. He didn't know who to trust. If the man was telling the truth, then what? What kind of trouble had he stumbled into? Well, I'm going to need to make a few calls, Daniel said, finally breaking the silence. I'll figure out what to do with him. As Hayes left the room, Daniel sat down at his desk and stared at the file in front of him. The man's name didn't mean anything to him. There were no connections, no prior arrests, no known associates. Just a blank slate, and that didn't make sense. Daniels knew there was something the man wasn't telling him. He picked up the phone and dialed the number for the precinct's higher-ups. After a few rings, his superior answered. "Daniels, what's going on?" Captain Harris's voice crackled through the receiver. "I need some help," Daniels said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "I've got a guy here who's claiming to be part of some secret organization. He's not your typical suspect. Calm, collected, like he's been expecting this. He's not giving me a straight answer." There was a long pause on the other end. Daniels could practically hear the wheels turning in Harris's head. "You've got a real winner there, Daniels," Harris said finally. "Look, I don't know what you've gotten yourself into, but I don't want you making any moves without consulting me first. Keep him there, don't engage too much. We'll send someone down to help you sort it out." Daniels frowned. "You're not going to tell me anything? I'm sitting here staring at a man who claims he's part of something bigger, and you want me to just sit tight?" "You don't know what you're dealing with, Daniels," Harris said, his tone suddenly sharp. "You've made an arrest. You need to let us handle it from here. Keep your distance and don't go digging into things that aren't your concern." Daniels clenched his jaw, frustration bubbling up inside him. "I can't just sit here. Something's not right." "You will," Harris snapped. "Just do your job. I'll be there soon." The line went dead, and Daniel sat there staring at the phone for a long moment. He wasn't satisfied. His gut told him that something was wrong, and it wouldn't sit well with him until he figured it out. A few minutes later, a knock on the door pulled him out of his thoughts. This time it wasn't Hayes. The door opened slowly, and a man in a dark suit stepped inside. Daniels recognized him instantly. Special Agent Cole, an investigator from a federal agency. "I'm here to take over the case," Agent Cole said, his tone no nonsense. Daniels stood up, trying to mask his surprise. He hadn't expected the feds to get involved so quickly. "Wait, what?" "The higher-ups just told me to hold off until they got here." Agent Cole's gaze hardened. "I don't care what your captain told you. This man is under federal jurisdiction now. You can either hand him over to us or we'll handle it another way." Daniel swallowed hard, realizing there was no winning here. He had no authority to refuse. "All right, fine. But you need to tell me what's going on." "I can't tell you anything right now," Agent Cole said curtly. "But trust me, you're better off not knowing. Just let us do our job." Daniels hesitated, but finally relented. The feds had already taken control of the situation. He could feel his sense of power slipping away. He had started this, and now he was being pushed out. He didn't like it. As Cole left the room with the man, Daniel stood in the silence, his mind racing. Everything had changed in the span of a few hours. He had arrested a man who was now in the hands of people who seemed to know far more than he did. Daniels felt like a spectator in his own life, watching as the world around him shifted in ways he couldn't control. But deep down, he knew one thing. This wasn't over. He would find out what was really going on. He had to. The next few days felt like a blur for Daniels. He couldn't escape the image of the man in the interrogation room, his calmness, his words that kept echoing in his mind. "You're involved now, whether you want to be or not." It haunted him. No matter how hard he tried to get back to his normal routine, he couldn't stop thinking about it. After the feds took the man, Daniels had been left in the dark. He had expected a follow-up, maybe an explanation. But nothing. His phone remained silent, and the precinct had a strange air of secrecy surrounding it. He had been sidelined, his role in the arrest minimized, his questions unanswered. It wasn't until 3 days later that Daniels received a call. It was Agent Cole. "Daniels, we need to talk," Cole said, his voice as cold as ever. "Meet me at the diner on Oak Street in an hour. Don't bring anyone, just you." Daniels felt his stomach drop. The call was too vague, too secretive. He had been waiting for this moment, hoping for answers, but now that it was finally here, he wasn't sure if he was ready. Still, he didn't have a choice. He agreed. An hour later, Daniels sat in a corner, booth of the diner, his eyes scanning the empty street outside. The low hum of the diner was the only sound in the otherwise quiet morning. He kept checking the time, the minutes dragging by. Finally, Agent Cole walked in. His dark suit, as always, was perfectly pressed. He looked like someone who never had a second thought, someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Cole sat down across from Daniels, not bothering with pleasantries. "You're probably wondering why I called you here," he said, getting straight to the point. "And I'll tell you. But I need you to understand that you're in this deeper than you think. There's no turning back now." Daniel's heart began to race. He leaned forward, trying to hide his impatience. "I don't understand. What is going on? Why didn't you tell me anything after the arrest?" Cole sighed, his eyes narrowing slightly. "We had to take a step back, Daniels. You weren't ready to know the full picture yet." "Ready to know?" Daniels repeated, his confusion growing. "What do you mean? What's so dangerous that I wasn't ready for it?" "You've heard of shadow organizations, haven't you?" Cole asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Groups that operate outside of the law, doing things most people wouldn't even believe. The man you arrested is part of one of those groups." Daniels's head was spinning. He had no idea what Cole was talking about. "So what? He's some kind of criminal mastermind?" "No, not at all," Cole said, his voice calm but firm. "What you don't understand, Daniels, is that this group isn't about breaking the law for the sake of chaos. They're here to protect people in ways the government can't, to handle situations that would otherwise be ignored. They make tough decisions, decisions that aren't always easy to swallow." Daniels stared at him, struggling to make sense of this. "So you're telling me that this guy's part of some secret force, handling stuff that no one else can?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Cole replied. "And you're involved now because you've seen a piece of it. When you arrested him, you got too close. That's why we've been keeping you in the dark. We're protecting you, Daniels. But this is bigger than you or me." Daniels sat back, trying to process the words. "So what now? What am I supposed to do with all this?" Cole gave him a grim look. "You have a choice. You can walk away. Forget everything you've learned. We'll make sure you're safe. Or you can stay involved, help us, and learn more about what's really going on." But there's no turning back. Daniels could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had always thought of himself as just a cop doing his job. But now he was standing at the edge of something much larger. The idea of walking away seemed impossible, though. There was too much at stake, too many unanswered questions. He sat silently for a moment, thinking. Finally, he spoke. "What do you need from me?" Cole's eyes softened just a little. "We need your help in understanding who else is involved. The man you arrested, he's just one piece of the puzzle. There are others, and we need people who can dig into this, people who aren't afraid to ask the right questions." Daniels nodded slowly. "And if I decide to help you, what happens next?" "Then we start pulling the threads," Cole said. "You'll have access to information, to people who can help you. But it's dangerous. There will be times when you won't know who to trust. The higher-ups won't always have your back. But we will." Daniels felt a shiver run down his spine. The stakes had never been higher. But something inside him, something deep down, knew he couldn't walk away now. Not when there was so much more to uncover. "All right," Daniels said, his voice steady. "I'll help you, but I need more answers. I need to know exactly what I'm getting into." Cole gave him a long look, then nodded. "You'll get them. But remember, this is just the beginning. The road ahead won't be easy." Daniels stood up, the decision now made. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back. But one thing was clear. He couldn't turn back now. He had already stepped into a world he didn't fully understand, and the only way forward was through it. As Daniels left the diner, he felt a strange sense of resolve settle over him. The world he knew was no longer the world he lived in. And as he stepped out into the street, he knew that whatever came next, he would face it head on.